in other contexts. Okay, so with that said, let me just tell you a little bit about what I have planned for the day. So I'm going to start by talking about these concepts of historical memory and historiography. And more so than just talking about them, I'm going to show you some of the resources we have. And the reason that I'm focusing on historical memory and contested history and historiography right up front is that I don't think students can really take full advantage of this lesson on Confederate monuments unless they have some understanding about these terms. So I think that's really an essential piece before we look at any monuments and any contested history. After we do that, I will share with you a framework for how to analyze different monuments. So again, might use it with our Charlottesville lesson, but you might use it with other monuments that you'll be analyzing. Most of our time then will be spent looking at this history and dispute, Charlottesville and Confederate monuments lesson. And so we will do an abbreviated version of that. We don't have time to do everything, but I want to sort of walk you through what's there and then have you experience some of the pieces of it. And then I'll wrap up by talking about some additional free resources from the Choices program that are related broadly to this topic, and just to kind of give you a sense of everything that we've got here. So be sharing some other information with you. And then I'll end with a little pitch that if you like what you see here from the Choices program, we are holding a program in Barcelona this January. It's a 2-day program. And you're all welcome to attend and come learn more about the Choices program. So hopefully that sounds like a good way to spend this hour plus. You see that I put here, please interrupt me. Rest assured that I'm not going to talk for an hour and a half. That's not my style. I'm going to share materials with you, and I'm going to ask you to give me some feedback and engage in a bit of discussion. So hopefully you will interact with me and we'll have a good discussion. Everything that I mentioned, which is mostly Choices materials, but I'll be referring to some additional materials, everything that I mentioned is free, okay? Everything that I'm going to mention is on this 2-page interactive document that I'll send to you, Andreas, or I can send it directly to folks if you share their emails. So I put this together because I don't want you to worry as I walk through the different materials that we have. That I don't want you to think about, well, where is that and what's the URL for that source that's not the Choices program. Everything is on one neat piece of interactive page, and you all will get that. So I invite you just to listen, participate, think about what I'm saying, and don't worry about where everything is on all these different websites. And then finally, again, this is very much a session that is devoted to resources that are appropriate for secondary level use. So it's not, again, not an academic presentation. All right, so with that said, let me just also start though by saying a little bit about the Choices program very briefly. As Andrea said, we are in Providence, Rhode Island in the States. We're basically part of the history department at Brown University. We have been serving teachers for 35 years. And the reason I like to talk about kind of who we are and what we do is one of our taglines is that we say that we like to democratize the research that's found at Brown University. So what you see on the right-hand side are different scholars. We've worked over 35 years with hundreds of scholars. And the idea behind the Choices program is to take high quality university level scholarship and then package it into something that secondary level students can access. And here you see our old writing room. And the job of the writers is to take that research and put it into something that you all can use in your classroom. So that's the idea behind our program. And I think we're successful because we're still around after 35 years. Okay, so that's enough about the Choices program. I can answer questions at the end if people want to hear more about us. But what I want to do right now is start with kind of a bit of a discussion or thinking about this term historical memory and thinking about the difference between history and memory, okay? A little bit about historiography too. And so with apologies to Brown University, I'm going to go ahead and quote a professor from Yale University, Professor David Blight. Some of you may know his work on the Civil War. And I do this because I think that he is, out of anybody that I've come across who talks about historical memory, I think he is the most accessible scholar in talking about historical memory. And I just share with you here A couple of the quotes that I like of his, which is this first one here: memory is often owned, history is interpreted. And again, the reason I'm doing this is we can't look at monuments or Confederate monuments in particular without having students understand something about historical memory and the difference between history and memory. Memory dictates, history just writes. I kind of like that one. And he also talks about collective memory. But I think when we talk about collective memory, we have to always ask students, who are we talking about with this collective? Whose story gets told? Okay, who gets to write the history books? Whose memory are we remembering? So if you like to work with students on any of these topics, these bigger terms and topics about historical memory, I would just point you to some of his work. And again, in that document that I'll share with you, I've got a link to all of his work. So bringing it down now from the scholarly level to sort of how do you make 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds really understand these terms, historical memory and the difference between history and memory. I'm going to show you two short videos. And I mentioned before we started the webinar, I have 5 or 6 very short videos that I'm going to show. And I know that that's a lot of video clips to show in a short webinar. But I also know as a former teacher that if I don't show these videos to you, if I just talk about how great they are, you're never going to have time to actually look at them. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you these 2 videos. And I'm going to ask you to think about if these videos will help you in your classroom to bring down these questions and these issues. So go ahead and pull up these videos. Right. You'll see with our videos, all of the videos are closed captioned. All videos are free, okay? And all of them are framed around a question. So here's the first one. How do governments and citizens shape historical memory?
Parades, monuments, textbooks, art, music. Those are all forms of commemoration. Something like a parade is an official, what we call official memory. It's sanctioned typically by the state, unless it's an act of resistance. But something like art and music, you can see a lot of collective memory coming out in analyzing primary artifacts in art and music that could give you alternative narratives of what happened.
Okay, so again, short. Let me show you the other one. A little bit longer. What is the difference between history and memory?
So I think the stories that are most often told are the ones that make people feel good, that are uplifting. And often our history has been told as what we imagined it to be rather than what it actually was. And so when we're doing history, and everybody can do history, we shouldn't imagine what it was or what we think it was or what we wanted it to be, but evaluate what it was. And in order to do that, we look at primary documents and we ask all kinds of questions of those documents, and we ask them from different points of view. And so if you're going to understand something like the American Revolution, you need to be thinking about, okay, well, what were free white women thinking about this revolution? What were landless white men thinking about this revolution? What were enslaved Black people thinking of this revolution? What were the Iroquois thinking about this revolution? That if you think about it from the point of view of the people that have left the most sources, which are the master class, you're going to get a very narrow understanding of the past. And there's a tendency to romanticize that because we want to understand American history as an upward trajectory, that, you know, things are just steadily getting better for everybody all the time. That isn't always what was. That's what we imagine to be. So we need to be very clear that we're evaluating the sources we have, that we're interrogating those sources, that we're asking from multiple point of views, that we're not just remembering what is easy, what is convenient, and what makes us feel good.
Okay, so 2 very short videos. Anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts about if these would work in your classroom to help explain some of these concepts?
I think it probably depends upon it differs from country to country. I mean, I live in Sweden. We don't have the same amount of contested history, which means that we do have some conflicts as well with the native population and history unwritten. So, but we don't have several different narratives of history alive in memory, I would say.
Okay, interesting. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so might work depending on the context, maybe not in all the classrooms in Sweden. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Or even share how you sometimes talk about contested history or contested memories and the difference between history and memory?
Yeah, I think I have other student group myself. I think I will also participate. So my students are art students and
Okay.
master education. So I think there is actually in that age still very little knowledge about it.
Mhm.
So I do educate this.
Okay, so
But,
these could work.
it is very interesting because I have a very international. So because you said about the different different countries having different histories,
Mhm.
I found actually that all the nationalities quite retrieve information about history which they didn't learn because of the narrative of their country or their schools they had. So I think it is very valuable to educate this and to even if one thinks that the country has only one kind of history to tell, there is actually, when we go deeper, quite a lot of history untold, like female history, for example, or like even in the more detailed and the greater picture, I think.
Okay, good. And Michu, can I ask where you are located?
I'm located in Rotterdam and I'm teaching at the KPK, the Royal Academy of Arts in Den Haag.
Perfect. Okay, great. Good. So maybe some of these videos will be helpful in getting at getting the students to start being aware of these concepts and terms. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Should I move us on? In the chat. Okay, so it's hard to find historical written sources from people with various backgrounds, so it's hard to bring their voices into the classroom. Okay, yeah, so that is what Choices program is pretty good at. So let's talk at the end about some ways that you might access some of our other material as well, because we're all about trying to get these historical written sources from people with various backgrounds out to students. And I think even before you do that, helping students just to see that some of these histories are contested, so that like this professor was talking about with the American Revolution, well, who whose story are we telling there? Are we telling indigenous people's stories, how they experienced the revolution, how enslaved Black people, how free Black people experienced it, et cetera. So I hope that some of these videos might help to just kind of open up some of these topics with your students, because I think they need that understanding that history is contested and there's difference between history and memory before they can really dig into looking at some of the history surrounding the monuments that we're going to be looking at. Okay, I'm going to move us along. I just want to mention, again, you'll get this all in the handout. We have a lot of material on YouTube. We have great YouTube collections, but the two that I want to point you to is the first one here is Understanding Historical Memory. That's got a nice collection of videos. And then this other collection, How Historians Do Their Work, might be something that you all want to have a look at, because there's, again, lots more videos on a variety of topics of historical memory, but also other historical thinking skills as well. Okay. And so again, the reason that I put this up first is that when we get to the Charlottesville lesson, you're going to see that the first part of the Charlottesville lesson has students looking at these short videos and some other videos, and then asking them questions about, okay, what did the professor mean here? What's written or remembered publicly is dictated by whoever is in power. What does that even mean? So again, helping the students to think about these issues, these terms, and then that sets them up to be ready to dig into the Charlottesville lesson. So rest assured that this is the first part of the Charlottesville lesson, is looking at these videos on historical memory and historiography and understanding them. Okay. Second thing I want to mention before we kind of go any further is in terms of like a best practice when talking about contested monuments or contested memory, is before we sort of talk about looking outside of our own country at different monuments or places or histories, et cetera, it's important, at least for when I work with American students and American teachers, it's important to have them think about, well, what do we have in our own city, our own state, our own country that's contested, right? So again, starting at home, looking at what we have, and before we look at other monuments or memorials around the world. And so I always ask teachers and students to think about what kinds of controversial or contested memorials, monuments, or museums exist in your own town, in your own country, et cetera. And if they can't think of any, I say, okay, we open it up to the world. And this is usually done in the context of when I'm talking about our genocide unit, and we have a whole section in our genocide unit that looks at memorials and monuments to genocide around the world. And again, before students can do that, I want them to look kind of at home. So I'm going to ask you, what do you have in your own country, your own city, your own country, your own whatever space you know? What kinds of monuments, memorials, museums do you have that have a contested history? And then I'll show you what some of the American teachers come up with. But yeah, go ahead. Someone want to jump in and tell me?
So perhaps also a moment as I'm jumping in, sorry, Mimi, to say, please do use the chat as well if you want to answer the questions. You don't have to take the floor and speak, but if you want to write a message where you're from and what kind of contested monument or issue you have in your immediate surrounding.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, please use either or.
So this is Brianne. My video is not working for some reason, at least on my screen, but okay. I'm in Utah, okay. And it's only been a few years since I even had heard about this. But we have Topaz Mountain, which for those of you who don't know, it was essentially a concentration type camp for Chinese Americans that they interred them in for a period of time. And that's probably an hour or two away from me. And I never heard about it as a high schooler. Yes. I didn't hear it as a college student. I did not hear it until being a professional in the education system. And I thought that was crazy.
Yeah. I thank you for sharing that. And I actually had a similar experience knowing nothing about Japanese American incarceration till graduate school. So that's a hole in the U.S. that actually Choices has a curriculum on Japanese American incarceration, but many students don't even know that history. So thank you for sharing that.
We can find the same in Sweden. I was saying we don't have that much contested monuments, but we do have history untold, history that I wasn't taught when I was in high school, mostly concerning minorities in Sweden who have been mistreated or throughout history, and that many of my students still know very little about. So if we don't have contested monuments, but you can always have a discussion, why isn't there a monument about this? What monuments are lacking?
Yeah.
So.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent point. Absolutely. And I do think it's really important to start at home before we look elsewhere. Anybody else want to share?
Well, I'm in Holland, so obviously we have a lot. We have I just around the corner here. I have a Piet Hein statute from the VOC time.
Okay.
It's one of the sea heroes from that time, which we now have a different opinion on. And we have many street names, which
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Same in the States. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we also have the Moluccan history, which is a minority group which is not seen. I think even the Indonesian history is not yet really acknowledged fully.
Okay.
So there's actually quite a lot, but I would say as a monument, the Piet Hein monument is the most discussed at the moment in this city where I live.
Okay, great. Okay, good. That's a perfect example. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm gonna. Oh, wait, there's something here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great, Daniela. Thank you. Statue of Birkenau-Richten. Yep. Right. He's a promoter of culture, and okay, good. Right. So very different views on his legacy. Good. Yeah. So when I share this in the States, the most easy one is Christopher Columbus statues. I live in Worcester, Massachusetts. We have a Christopher Columbus statue, but there are Christopher Columbus statues everywhere. There's the Jose Marti statue in New York City. If you're doing anything with Cuban history, you may know Jose Marti. His legacy is contested. Some people think he was fabulous and wonderful. Some don't. Some have different opinions of him. And then, of course, we can always talk about different museum exhibits. So the 9/11 Museum, lots of controversy about what story we're going to tell with the 9/11 Museum. The Enola Gay exhibit, this Vietnam War Memorial. So all of these have contested histories. And again, the point is just to maybe help students think about it at home. I tried to rack my brain for Europe. I don't know it as well, but I did come up with these two museums in Europe that probably you all know much more about than I do, but I have read about different contested legacies and discussions around what should be displayed and what should be discussed in these museums. So he's from agency, a couple monuments on population exchange. Okay, so even that population exchange between Greece and Turkey, very interesting, very, very interesting. Okay. All right, so I think you get the idea. Start at home first. So that's gonna kind of wrap up the piece about historical memory, contested histories, etc. Now what I'd like to do is move into the second piece and talk about this framework for analyzing monuments and memorials, not just Confederate monuments, but kind of any monuments or memorials that have some contested history associated with them. And to do this, I'm really going to draw on the work of Renee Attere. You're going to see Renee Attere's videos in just a moment. She's a scholar currently at Brown University, and she's been very helpful to the Choices program in developing some of our materials. And so pretty much everything that I'm going to show in this next section can be traced back to her work. So before we talk about how to analyze different monuments, One thing to keep in mind is that if you are going to be showing students these Confederate monuments or monuments that are somehow related to the slave trade, and it doesn't have to be monuments in the States, it could be, you all may have some monuments in Europe that are related to the slave trade, it's important to sort of set the context about the difficulty around it, right? And so she has two short videos that these two I'm not going to show you just because of the interest of time, which really help kind of frame the discussion for students about why it's difficult to discuss monuments to slaveholders, okay? And so the first one, what are the challenges of commemorating the history of slavery? So here she talks about how it's difficult to represent things like trauma, violence, horror, how to represent the Black body, how to actually talk about these difficult periods of US history. So it might be a video that you want to show your students. Again, not going to take the time here, but I've just summarized the videos on the right-hand side. And then I think the better of the two, though, is this one where she talks about the sources of controversy surrounding memorials to slavery. And so here she talks a little bit more about how we select the subject or the topic to look at. And then she talks about language and language and resistance to monuments. And then I think very interestingly, she talks about this debate that we have in the States, maybe you have it in Europe too, about how do we select artists to make these monuments. So, and she talks a little bit about, there was a debate about a Martin Luther King statue. Should the person who created that statue, should that person be Black? Should that person be white? Was it okay to have a Chinese artist create the statue? So bringing in lots of these topics that can be discussed when thinking about some of the difficulties around having kids examine and discuss and talk about monuments to slaveholders. So I recommend these two videos. Not going to show them, they'll be on your sheet. The video that I am going to show you is her framework for how to actually analyze a memorial or a monument, okay? And so she breaks it down into 4 pieces, and then we're going to actually look at some slides of a monument to Harriet Tubman. She breaks this framework that she has down to 4 points. So thinking about what's the space like, what's the public space like, the visual, just describing what do you see, what are you looking at? Is it attractive? Is it meant to be attractive? Is it not attractive? Is it meant to kind of shock? And then third is the meaning, how signage directs you to understand the monument. And then the fourth is the interpretation. So what do you take from it? And what I'd like you to do is maybe just jot these 4 down, okay? Because I'm going to have you look at a series of slides of a statue of Harriet Tubman. And we're going to see if you can apply this framework to these images that I'll show you of the statue of Harriet Tubman. And for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with Harriet Tubman, there's a background reading that goes with the lesson. So you can get all of that information there, but just know that she was a leader of the Underground Railroad, which was a way for enslaved peoples to escape slavery and go to the north. She was born into slavery, but she also, so she's really well known for her leading the Underground Railroad, but she also was a spy in the Civil War. And so did a lot of, has a very rich history also related to the Civil War. And I think she's sort of well worth learning about if you're going to be talking about some of these monuments. And so again, what I'm going to do now is just sort of stop sharing and show you this framework. Let's see what she found. I hope that this framework will be helpful to you in any of the work that you're doing, looking at different things. I'll make that big. All right.
In this analytical framework, I think there's 4 things that people need to attend to. The first is space. What is the public space that you're entering? And that's the first thing I do, is I think about, like, where am I? Is it in the middle of a city? Is it on the outskirts? Is it hidden away behind an office building? So that issue of space is essential to understanding a monument. What's around the monument? Is the monument in a green space so there's nothing around it? Is it in front of City Hall? Students should start to, is it next to a police station? They can draw these moments of meaning just by looking at the larger site and the object's relationship to the larger site. The second is, what's the visual? What is it that you're looking at? And to actually just slow down enough, I mean, really slow down, at least 15 minutes of just looking, right? Not that 17 seconds that we use in museums, but to be really deliberate and mindful when you're looking. So what's the visual and describing the visual? And the third is meaning. And that is really meaning coming from those who commissioned the memorial, any signage in that public space on the monument, and how is it directing you to understand the monument? And then taking the first three, so taking the issues around space, around the visual and meaning, and then applying interpretation. I think interpretation is essential because I think what happens is oftentimes we encounter a monument and we think the meaning is static. And meaning is not static. Meaning is always changing, it's always shifting. And then there's unintentional things that happen in public space that even designers do not anticipate. So what is it then that the meaning that you take away from it, or might bring your own kind of background in history perhaps, or that you have an experience around these issues, and then how might you interpret the whole site?
Okay. So, anybody have any thoughts or comments on that framework? Would that be something that you might be able to use with your students?
I think yes, it's quite interesting, especially because I have such an international student group from all kind of Yemen, Russia, all kind of Asia locations. It's quite interesting how they deal with their surroundings in a different way, and kind of also what they learned and what they perceive normal and excessive. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Excellent. Anybody else? Thoughts on that framework? Okay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is see if you can apply this framework. So again, the space, the visual, the meaning, the interpretation. See if you can apply it as I show you a series of slide images of this Harriet Tubman memorial. And I'm going to, and again, all of this is in the document that I sent you, so you can replicate this. We also have a couple of other monuments, slide decks to other monuments that you can use to give students even more opportunity to analyze monuments. So here they are, and I'm going to spend about 10 to 15, we're good on time, 10 to 15 seconds on each slide, although probably not on this first one. So here we go. I'm not going to read this all, but I am going to read a little piece of it. So the image is a larger than life bronze sculpture depicting abolitionist organizer and Underground Railroad leader Harriet Tubman. And it stands at the crossroads of St. Nicholas Avenue, West 122nd Street, and Frederick Douglass Boulevard in Harlem. So this is in New York City in Harlem. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in Maryland around 1822. She escapes via the Underground Railroad. She helps many people get to freedom, but she's also known as a scout, a spy, and a nurse in the Civil War. And she also, after the Civil War, does lots of great work for the sick, homeless, and disabled. The memorial is commissioned through the Department of Cultural Affairs 1% for Arts program, which was created by African-American sculptor Allison Sarr. So they use an African-American sculptor. The artist has depicted unstoppable Tubman not as the conductor of the Underground Railroad, but as the train itself, an unstoppable locomotive. The roots of slavery pulled up in her wake. Her style was inspired by the West African, quote, passport masks, and around the granite base of the monument are bronze tiles alternately depicting events in Tubman's life and traditional quilting patterns. Okay. So that's what you would see as you enter. Spend just 10 seconds looking. Okay. So let me ask you, anybody want to take a stab either by unmuting yourself or using the chat box? If you can.
I have a question. How high is the monument?
Yeah, so it's about 8 or 9 feet tall. You're gonna, in the next video that I'm gonna show you, Renee Atera is gonna kind of break it apart. And I think she says it's 8 or 9 feet tall. So it's quite tall.
So it means that you sort of look up.
You're looking up, absolutely. Yeah, that's
Okay.
a great point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
good.
If I can say something, I thought it was very interesting. The location is, I'm not sure what that is exactly, but traffic triangle. I know about traffic circles. I guess it's some kind of. It sounds like it's a traffic machine of some sort. Like and to me, this indicates that they were trying to make some changes to the public space around that area, and oh yeah, let's throw in a statue while we're at it.
Exactly.
Kind of,
You're correct. Kind of a busy intersection. A traffic triangle is like sort of a it's where roads come together. It's a very busy spot. Yeah. Okay.
But it's a spot where cars pass by. It's not accessible to pedestrian easily then, because it's in the middle of an intersection.
So it is a little bit, no, you're right. It's a very busy spot, but there is a little spot here. Let me see. You can walk along here and sit, but it's minimal, right? So you're right. It's sort of, and Andreas is right. It sort of was stuck here, right?
Yeah, it's not a place where a lot of people stroll by regularly.
Exactly.
You zoom by it in a car.
Yes. Okay. Correct. You're absolutely correct.
It also doesn't feel like an important square. It feels like a square in a neighborhood, a bit like close to a city, but doesn't feel like it's one of the squares. Also, it's a side square.
It's not an important. You get the sense that it's not an important square, and you're correct.
Yeah, yeah, it's because of the architecture of the buildings. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm also noticing the flag.
For those reasons.
Oh, sorry.
Say it again. You're noticing the flat
of the American flag on the right hand.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Good.
Is there a controversy because of the fact that it's located there? Are there people saying it should be moved or it should have been put in a different place?
Yeah, there's some I'm going to show you a video in a minute. There's some unhappiness about where it was placed and why it was chosen to go there. I think the research behind it is basically the city had this empty space, and like Andrea said, well, we got to do something with it. Let's stick this in. There's also controversy about the way, the direction that she's pointed in, which you can't really see that in the slides, but you learn that when I show you the video. So yeah, there's some controversy about this. Overall, this monument, does it really give Harriet Tubman the credit and the reverence that she deserves? Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in?
Are we also talking about the visual and the meaning, or only about the space?
You can comment on any of these. Yep.
I found it quite upsetting. No, I don't know the history of her, but that she has no eyes and seems kind of hollow. I find that quite upsetting as an aesthetic.
Okay.
So that was kind of for me a trigger, and she looks slightly straight up, but it is like there's no future in her sight. There's only a past in the monument. So I found that quite.
Okay, so now you're talking about like the visual and the interpretation. That's interesting.
Yes.
No one has ever, so I've done this a couple of times. No one has ever mentioned about the eyes, but you're right, the eyes are really hollow. That's interesting. Everybody sees something different. That's interesting.
I also thought, and this was, I think, maybe on the first slide.
Yeah.
And again, I've never been to this place to have seen it in person, but the artist's name is larger than Harriet Tubman's name on the one before this.
Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like that's weird to me. I'm like, her name should be like, I get artistry, like, and like she should get credit for it, but like that shouldn't have been the first name that I read if it's to honor Harriet Tubman.
Right.
So.
Okay. And so that's actually a very good point. And maybe some of that comes out of a reaction. I don't know this for certain. I'm making a theory. Comes out of the reaction that that I mentioned with the Renee Attier videos that I didn't show you, where there's a lot of discussion about who should be making these monuments, and should we be using African American folks to make these monuments, and which kind of artists are appropriate. And so maybe the fact that Alison Saar, we learned is an African American artist, maybe that's sort of an overreaction to that, right? Making sure that we get that name out. I don't know. We can also, I think it's always interesting also to have the students throw out assumptions or theories or ideas, and see if we can find the answers to them. Mariella is a statue placed in a neighborhood of New York, which looks as if it carries the suffering of the people in its race, right? And then EACEA, you were saying it's not easy to reach. Yeah, I find, what do people think about this part? I really like this sort of breaking. My sense of this is breaking free. Okay, with these long tentacles. Now, someone else maybe looks at that and says, well, she's rooted, but I see it as kind of breaking free. The front of the dress is like the front of a locomotive. Absolutely. Yep. That's right, Daniela. Yeah. That's
it's
why
strange that they chose roots instead of chains. If we're talking about slavery here, there were on her dress, there are broken chains, but they depict the person as rooted, breaking free from, instead of chains, which is often used as symbolic for moving towards freedom. So
yeah, that's an interesting point. They absolutely did not do that. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to comment on it? The visual, the meaning. Go for it, Andres.
I thought it was interesting that, but maybe this says more about the statues that are around me here in The Hague in the Netherlands. But it was so evident to me that this was a statue of a Black person. And when I think of statues around me, you can't really ascribe any race to them because they're sort of bronze, or you can't really tell. But here it's very evident. Like they've clearly made, to me, looks like it's very clear that this is a Black woman.
Yes. Interesting. Okay, interesting. Interesting point. So we could do a whole analysis of the statues around you, and the artists who created them and their purpose, etc. So again, this is a framework you can use to analyze all kinds of statues and monuments. I think it's got wide applicability. And if you decide to focus on Harriet Tubman or some of other folks during this period, again, we've got 2 other slide decks that you can use to look at 2 other monuments to Harriet Tubman. Anybody else want to chime in? No? Okay, so now I'm going to do, thank you all for sharing. I'm going to have you listen to how Renee Attere dissects this.
So the second memorial that I'll talk about is by Allison Sarr, and it's called Swing Low. And it was installed in 2008, again, in a very funky triangular space in Harlem. So at the intersections of West 122nd Street, St. Nicholas Avenue, and then Frederick Douglass. So it's significantly at Frederick Douglass Boulevard as part of its situation. And it is if we look at the visual, it's quite strikingly different from the Fern Cunningham. So it is a singular statue of Harriet Tubman, and in her skirt, and it's an incredible kind of black and green patina, which is the surface quality of the bronze. So as you look at her skirt, there's spaces embedded in the skirt, which are meant to represent the freedom seekers, but they are not present in the same way that the Fern Cunningham. So we have the space, which is a nice little public park that's meant that you can come and sit down and kind of be restful in the hectic bustle of the city. And then you have this visually, the statue is, I believe, 10 feet tall. It's enormous. It dominates the public space. And you're really aware of this kind of green and black patina, the black patina of her skin and the green of her shirt and skirt. Like, it's really dominate the space. Emerging out of the back are these remarkable tree branches, and they've planted oak trees all around the back part of the monument. So she's meant to be emerging out of the forest. So here we go to meaning, and here meaning and interpretation kind of go hand in hand, because the city has done a very effective job of interpreting this monument. And so there's lots of labeling, but those branches are meant to be, again, emerging out, but breaking from slavery. And so that she is a locomotive, really a train forcefully moving through space. And you get this very directional movement strangely, from north to south. The orientation has caused a lot of consternation from people who live in the neighborhood, because Harriet Tubman worked from the eastern shore of Maryland northward into Wilmington, Philadelphia, New York, and then across upstate New York. And so people are like, well, why isn't she facing north? And sometimes there's the reality of a geography of an urban site. And in this instance, it's above a subway grate. And so they had to direct her facing southward. But my interpretation actually has another level. So if we go to interpretation, she's right near a police precinct that has a reputation actually of police brutality. And so the nation that her back is turned against the police station is significant, I think, that she carries on her work despite the undergirding kind of issues of brutality and terror. And I think there's kind of a direct link that they're making between slavery and incarceration. Whether it's the city thought they were doing that, I would argue that it's one of the subtexts of the movement.
Okay, so that is her interpretation of it, and you heard her talk a little bit about comparing it to the other monuments that we're not going to take the time to look at. But anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to think about the city of Mostar, also where direction plays such a significant role on positioning the cross towards the Muslimic population facing the cross when they bid towards Mostar.
Okay.
Towards the direction of where they bid. I'm sorry, I lost words. But yeah, it's also the direction of the cross they posed is kind of a very strong action. So yeah, she reads it in a similar way.
Okay, interesting. Okay, it's an interesting connection. Okay. Anybody else make any connections, or anybody else hear anything in that in her analysis, which again, that's her opinion on it, her take on it? Anybody hear anything that surprised them? And it's 10. If you didn't know, it's 10 feet tall. I think I said 8 feet tall. But sorry.
My image was that this is not a very attractive place, and she didn't really comment on that. It was she claims that it's a place where you can leisurely stroll by, and I didn't get that impression.
I would agree with you. She sees it, I think, as a little more of a beautiful spot than most people who look at it. And when I've shared this PowerPoint with other groups of teachers, they tend to feel the way you do. That others here have commented that it's not in a great spot. I don't know how many people actually would come and stroll and sit, as she says. We don't know. It's open to interpretation.
What was this space before the monument was placed?
That's a really good question. I don't have a firm answer. I get the sense from kind of doing a little more reading on it, and then the next resource I'm going to mention, you can get a little more background information. I get a sense that, again, it wasn't a very well-used spot because it's in this spot in Harlem that is very small and where roads come together. So I think it was kind of not used. Okay. I can't say that for sure, but from some of the things I've read about it, I get that sense.
Yeah,
sorry, I was going to say that I think the fact that it's in Harlem is a significant part of that. And I mean, a lot of people in Europe may not realize that Harlem is part of New York City, where many Black people live.
Yes.
And it's has a very rich culture and history, but it also has had a lot of violence in the past. So I think the fact that she's there is very, very significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I should have pointed out that Harlem is a part of New York City. It is traditionally a very vibrant part of the city, but also a very poor part of the city, and has had its share of problems. But is out and actually now in a good Renaissance position.
I had the opportunity of visiting Belgrade with EuroClio this spring, where there was a history of moving monuments. Moving one monument to a more secluded place and and erecting a new monument with very different possibilities of interpretation. so what the history of the place can be interesting as well. Was this place used for something else before, and now it's used for this monument? So
right, that would be a good bit to look into. Absolutely. All right, I'm going to move us along just because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure we have enough time to get to everything. So again, thank you all for participating. So one other resource that I'm going to mention to you is this fabulous collection on contemporary monuments to the slave past. So this is not a choices resource. This is a resource that is a public history site. Renee Ater has done a lot of work on it, but she's had lots of collaborators. And if you go to this key kind of meta site, you can get all kinds of slide decks on contemporary monuments. And so you see, I've just listed some of them there. If you're focusing on the Underground Railroad, on emancipation monuments, monuments to resistance, monuments in Africa, monuments in Mexico, Central America, and South America. It's kind of all there for you. So again, you'll get the link, and I would encourage you, if you're looking for other slide decks on other monuments related to slavery and the slave past, you want to check this resource out. A second resource, not choices, but I highly recommend it, is this, and I think Renee Ater was worked on part of this, is a very short, about 6-minute video that talks about Monument Avenue and the lost cause. And so it's a kind of an introduction to Confederate monuments. And I think if you're looking for more background information, this might be the place to go. So again, you'll get all kinds of links in that doc, and you can use that. So now what I'm going to do is have us look at our History and Dispute, Charlottesville and the Confederate Monuments lesson. And so I'm going to just very quickly talk about some background points. Andreas talked a little bit about these points in the beginning, but just to review, this lesson was built around this white nationalist Nazi protest in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2017. It was called Unite the Right. And that protest came about because of the discussions about the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue. And some of the slogans that were heard there were Jews will not replace us, and they used swastikas. And this is actually a very, I find it very difficult even to talk about this period. And so that was their demonstration. And then, of course, there was a counter demonstration. Counter protesters were there. And they said things like no Trump, no KKK, no fascists in USA. And due to this exchange, one person was murdered. One of the counter protesters was murdered when one of the white nationalists ran over her with a car. So as you can imagine, this creates a lot of outrage, and there was outrage, but then there was a comment by then President Trump where he said, well, there were good people on both sides. That caused more outrage. And so this event really brought to the forefront this question about the Confederacy and the history of slavery and how we should remember it. And so it's important to remember, though, when we're thinking about this, and there's a 4-page background reading, so I'm just sort of summarizing it here. But it's important to know, if you don't know, that most or all of these Civil War monuments were built long after the actual end of the Civil War. And bringing it up to today, we still have, as someone mentioned, buildings, schools, streets, many places around the country, especially in the South, named after Confederate leaders. And so with this controversy, there was a movement to take down some additional monuments around the country, and that's what led us to create this lesson. There's a great video that I'm not going to take the time to show you that was filmed after, it was still filmed in 2017, but it was after this teaching with the news lesson was produced, but I would really point you to it, where we have Professor Emily Owens talking about how the history and memory of Confederate monuments are different, but I won't take the time to show that. I was going to, but let's just move us there. So in terms of what you find in the lessons, so there is that background reading that I just mentioned. It's 4 pages. You can skim it when we're gonna look at it in a minute. But I gave you some of the highlights. There's a very high interest video that I hope would hook students, and I'll show you that. We'll watch that together. Then you have students doing some of this work around historical memory. There's videos and a worksheet that I already mentioned to you. So that's like the next piece. And then the lesson is really built around this source set and some questions that go with the sources. And the sources are going to give students multiple perspectives on what should be done about the monuments. And then you can have the kids read these different source sets, answer the questions, have some discussion, and then there's an extra challenge piece, which I'll show you. And of course, like all choices lessons, we give you very clear objectives for the lesson. We do some sort of step-by-step work. And I think it's important, before I turn it over to you and have you actually look at some of these sources, is to keep some of these bigger compelling questions in mind. So, beyond the monuments themselves, we wanted students to think about how this debate over Confederate monuments fits into the broader history of racism in the United States. And I think that question could be adapted in many ways to maybe some of your local context. Who has power to decide how history is remembered in public spaces? That's certainly a question that I hope you can ask in different contexts. How do we go about commemorating the past, and who's excluded and who's included? And then how do we honor complex traumatic histories in ways that are inclusive but don't repeat the trauma? That's a whole topic we could spend a lot of time on. So just giving you a sense of some of the bigger questions. So what I'm going to do now is, it's 11:05, I'm going to show you that video, and maybe I'll ask for some comments, or we'll just jump right into the lesson. And then what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to put in the chat box the URL, the link, so you can go to the actual lesson. You can read sources 1, 2, and 3 only. We don't have time to read all of them. They're short. I don't think it will take you a lot of time. And then I'd like you to look at the Analyzing Your Sources sheet and be ready to come back and do a little report out on what each source said about their position. Should the monuments come down or should they stay up? And then I always like to have students think about what quotes they find in those sources. And you can kind of skim around at some of the other questions. We won't have time to do that. And then I'll bring us back together, see if people have thoughts or questions or comments. So let's see this. Put in here in the chat box the link. I'm going to also just pull it up here. You all can go to that link. Okay, and so this is where that link should take you. So are we all there? Let me see. Is everybody on that page? Anybody have any trouble? Okay. So if you're on this page, History and Dispute, Charlottesville, the Confederate monuments, you see there's the objectives. There's a note to teachers about being sensitive about bringing up these issues of race and power, et cetera. And then down here is the introduction, the 4-page introduction that I said you can skim at another time. There's the worksheet. And then this is the media source sets, okay? If you click on that, you're going to see source number 1, source number 2, and then source number 3, okay? And that's what I'm going to ask you to read in just a minute. But before you do that, let me just show you the video.
Momentum is growing across the country to remove Confederate statues in the wake of Saturday's deadly white supremacist neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Crews removed 4 statues from parks in Baltimore.
Duke removing a statue of Robert E. Lee in the dark of night.
A monument to Confederate soldiers in Durham, North Carolina, torn down by protesters Monday.
It's a monument to segregation. It's a monument to human bondage. It's a monument to sedition and the breakup of the United States of America.
It's a monument of peace.
This monument is indeed a piece of our history.
It's a monument of reconciliation.
They are really monuments to Jim Crow.
Salutes to the Confederacy.
Monuments to racism.
Been fine for over 100 years. Maybe it's offensive to some people. I don't know who.
So why should we have statues to men who were slave owners and who dehumanized other human beings for their benefit?
There's a reason why when you go to Germany, there are no statues for Goebbels or Himmler. Cannot celebrate that terrible part of their history.
But if you forget your history, you are likely to repeat it. These historical figures, we need to remember who they are, what they stand for, and why we've moved on.
They're emblems of white supremacy, but that's precisely why I think they have to remain, so that we can grapple with this history instead of airbrushing it out.
The question that the people of New Orleans began to ask was, do these statues actually reflect who we ever have been as a people? And the answer is no.
We oppose this effort to inventory and remove all Confederate war memorials from public property in Jackson.
Let the people of Jacksonville vote on this issue.
There's enough grandstanding, enough speeches being made. Get it done.
The stain of slavery and racism that this monument represents for many, many people has no place in a compassionate, forward-looking city.
There is a difference, you see, between remembrance of history and the reverence of it.
This is a monument to our veterans and history. And how can you learn history? How can future generations learn history if you're taking it down?
It's really more than just teaching history. It's teaching an ideal. It's sending out a signal to the world of what we believe in.
People remember what they want to remember, and then they see what they want to see. Every generation is going to see these through different eyes.
It's far beyond just a Confederate statue.
Okay, so you may have thoughts about that, but I'm going to actually just jump us right over to looking at the lesson. Okay, so everybody has the link, right? What I want you to do is look at those sources. Back up there.
I just sent the direct link also to everyone
Okay.
to the source set, so you can click on that to get it.
Okay, that's great. I wanted folks to kind of get a sense of the whole the whole lesson, but that's great if you can just look at those, drill down right immediately to those sources, because I'm looking at our time. So please go ahead and read source 1, 2, and 3. And see if you can put that out. So again, source 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll give you I was going to give you 15 or 20 minutes. I think you have like 10 minutes. How about that? 10 minutes, read source 1, 2, and 3, and then see if you can report out on what the source says the position is about taking down the monument or not, and the quotes you're going to use, and then we'll move us into wrapping it up. So I'm going to bring us back together in about 3 minutes. So 3 minutes. See what you think. Okay, folks, in the interest of time, I am going to bring us back together a little bit early because I want to make sure we end on time, and we need a minute or two at the end for some housekeeping details. So if I was doing this with students, and when I do it with teachers as well, I mean, I would have everybody report back. What did the source say? What was the position that the source took? What were some key quotes that made you come to that conclusion, that they felt a certain way about the monuments? And then I do always like to ask students, you know, what questions does it raise for you? What do you wish you knew more about? What do you wonder about? In the interest of time, I'm not going to necessarily have us all report out there. I'm just going to kind of show you some kind of concluding pieces. And here are some additional questions for discussion with students. We kind of ask them to summarize the different perspectives. What are the major sources of tension and disagreement in the controversy? And what do different sides believe or should not be commemorated about the past? So again, returning to some of these bigger questions. There is an extra challenge. I'm not going to go into it now, where we quote then President Trump and to have students think about his comment, which I'll just read quickly to you here. So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down the statues to George? How about Thomas Jefferson? Are we going to take him down? You're changing history, you're changing culture. Is Robert E. Lee going to be next? I noticed that Stonewall Jackson is coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after that? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? We have questions that go with that comment of then President Trump. And I think that it's worth kind of digging into some of those questions and helping students think about what they can understand from comments like that. So that's there for you. Anybody just want to very quickly give any feedback on the lesson or ways that you might adapt this lesson to other monuments or in your own country, some ways that you might adapt it? You think it can be useful to you in your teaching? Just any kind of general quick comments before I wrap it up. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I think it will be useful. I have to try to adapt it to, you know, local monuments, because a Swedish 16-year-old don't know enough about the context in in the South, but it will be useful, definitely.
The framework will be useful. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, many 16-year-olds in our country don't know enough about it. So good. Anybody else have thoughts or ideas about how you might use this? We need to, using local statutes. I hope that this framework is helpful for you in using it with local statutes. I mean, that's sort of the idea. We don't assume that your students are going to know much about the U.S. South. So I hope that all of the resources that I shared today are going to be useful in some context for you in your local situations. Okay, so just a couple of other quick things. Changing history means changing the culture. Yes, it's a very, very, very common sentiment. So a few other resources quickly just to mention that are going to be on the handout. Very interesting article from the New York Times, which looks at how students at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which again was where that protest happened, took into their own hands the fact that they had a monument to the enslaved laborers who built the university, but they weren't happy with that monument and the process they went through to change that. And I think this really goes at the heart of this question, because it shows students that this issue is not dead. This is an issue we are grappling with right now. And of course, as I mentioned before, lots of places in the South and elsewhere really have still have many monuments, place names, symbols, etc., kind of dedicated to Confederate folks. So just to wrap up again, 2 object-based lessons that I'm going to just share with you and on this sheet. These 2 lessons come from our genocide unit, and they deal with the Ova Herero Nama people genocide perpetrated by Germany in present-day Namibia. And so the reason I am sharing them with you, they're free lessons, is because both of these lessons really deal with this question of historical memory, and they also both really use an object-based approach. So this lesson has students looking at a slide deck of images of artifacts that were stolen from Namibia and taken to Germany, and then Germany has repatriated them. So it's a way to kind of get students to think about historical memory and what's going on there, and it's also really based on these artifacts. And then the other free lesson from the genocide unit is looking at fashion as cultural heritage and historical memory. So how do people in present-day Namibia claim fashion, try to reclaim fashion and fashion trends as a way to kind of rewrite some of their history. And finally, please remember all of the videos on the Choices website are free. We haven't even touched on the videos we have on with our racial slavery unit, but if you go to choices.edu and go to our videos on the main navigation page, you can see all of our videos there. So please use them. And then finally, I hope you all will think about coming to Barcelona, January 16th to 17th, a Thursday, Friday. It's a fun and engaging time, and you will be able to pick 4 curriculum units that you want to bring back to your school, and everyone in your school can use them. And one of the units we will be looking at is our Weimar Republic and the rise of Nazi Germany. So I'm not going to skip that video and just say thank you to EuroClio and the Monumental Challenges program, and thank you to all of you for your time, and I'll turn it back to you, Andreas.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mimi.
Yeah.
And thank you also for the participants for sharing a bit on your perspectives. Just to wrap it up, I thought your lesson is really interesting and really nicely done. The first thought that I had when you also had a question on how you can adapt it for using it with your own students, I thought of actually a case that we developed a lesson plan as part of our Monumental Challenges project on a statue that is located here in The Hague, where I'm based with EuroClio. We're in The Hague in the Netherlands. And it's a statue with a lot of different, a lot of perspectives, just like this one on what is the real meaning and what does this symbolize. The legacy it relates to is more colonialism, but it doesn't really matter. But one thing that we did, sort of testing that out, is that we went to the statue and then we actually asked people in the surrounding area that we found just walking by, what does the statue mean to you? What do you know about this history, and so on. I think that could be a nice way to also adapt this kind of work to if you find a monument in your own backyard, so to speak, you can do it like that as well. You don't have to use only sources from the media, but you can also ask people around you. And I think one of the things that you might also find with your students then is that a lot of people don't know anything about what this statue might represent and what is the history. So that in itself also quite an interesting finding, of course, I think. Now, thank you so much again, Mimi. I will finish off by, housekeeping, as you mentioned. I wanted to mention first and foremost that all of what you have seen, this webinar and the series is part of our initiative called Contested Histories. There is a website, contestedhistories.org, where you have more than 500 cases of contestations in the public space. It's basically a big mapping study where you find case studies on all kinds of contested monuments, street names, etc. So that is a very helpful tool for educators, I hope. From the Contested Histories Initiative, this Monumental Challenges project is a bit of a spin-off. We have developed several lesson plans on different kinds of monuments all across the world, including actually Charlottesville statue, Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville. Our lesson plan is really geared more towards developing skills on media literacy and evaluating media sources. So please to have a look at it. We currently have a call out for teachers and educators to pilot these with their own students and give us some feedback. So there's an overview in the link that my colleague Lorianne just shared in the chat. So please click there and you'll get an overview of the lesson plans that we have developed and that we're currently looking for teachers to pilot. You'll get a sneak peek of them if you sign up for piloting these with your students, and we'll send them to you. And otherwise, stay tuned. We'll publish them all when the toolkit is ready and nicely designed sometime in the early new year. So that's it from me. We'll have another webinar in the series in a couple of weeks. So just follow us on social media and our website, EuroClio.eu. And I want to thank once again, Mimi and Choices Program at Brown for doing this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurianne.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mimi. Everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.